Welcome to the Graceful Exit podcast. I'm Kimberly Hoertz, founder of the Graceful Exit, created to educate, empower, and support women as they navigate divorce. Beginning with us, we are putting a stop to the divorce stigma through meaningful conversations about the emotional and endearing experience divorce often brings. My hope is that you'll follow along on this journey and join our community of women navigating divorce with grace. Hello. So today we have the pleasure of meeting with Laura Friedman Williams, who wrote a book that was recently published called Available. It's a memoir about sex after marriage, and which we will get into in a little bit. Part of the Graceful Exit is really about socializing these conversations that don't normally had, one being divorce, and the other, now that we're introduced to Laura, is sex after marriage. So I think it was important to bring her on to, again, socialize the conversation and just eliminate the shame and anything that comes along with it. So I will go ahead and introduce Laura.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So do you want to give us a little bit about your personal journey and how you kind of got into this space?
Yeah, sure. So my husband and I had been together for 27 years since we were 20 years old in college. And we separated about 4 years ago, almost 4 years ago, after I found out that he was having an affair. So the rupture for us was very quick and dramatic. Well, it was for me anyway.
Yes.
I definitely did not see it coming. I felt really content in my life. And so the breakup of my marriage was a tremendous shift for me in every way, of thinking about every part of my life and why I was in a relationship that served me well, that I believed served me well, that he believed was like suffocating him. So I really embarked on a journey at that point in my life after a few months of being completely devastated and, not functioning all that well, in which I decided I wanted to see what life was going to be like as a single woman. And that's where the dating and the sex came in. And a lot of it happened, it doesn't, things happen, I would say, like, not necessarily in a linear way, or they happen kind of concurrently. So there was a lot of shifting happening for me and reckoning with the life that I had been living, while also embracing this new life that I saw could be mine, which was a life that was going to be, well, I would be single. And, I really wanted to make myself available to live a very different kind of life.
I think part of a common theme I have heard of post-divorce is that those of us that have children as well find it really difficult to blend those two worlds, or even to have two separate lives. It's almost like you're leading two separate lives. When you have the children, you're a full-time mom. And when you don't have the children, you want to be able to explore what you hadn't prior been able to. So do you want to talk us through the journey of how the book was written and what it actually entails?
Yes. And I want to say yes to the part about the kids, and that I think that it morphs over time, but it always is tricky, right? It doesn't necessarily, there's no point at which you say, like, okay, this is solved. I figured this out. I'm always grappling with how to be as present for my children as I always was, while also honoring that I have a separate life from them now, where I didn't before. And a lot of that, actually, in writing the book, that was a big component of it for me, because I knew that writing a book that really focused on my life, my sex and dating life after marriage, I knew that was a thorny issue for my kids, and not something that I think we feel free to talk about, to talk about our sexuality when we're mothers, at any age, let alone with men that are not our children's fathers. I definitely felt hesitant to do that. And I was really afraid of hurting my children and of embarrassing them. I'd say it was both things. That was on one side. The other side was, I really wanted to show them how empowered I was, that in fact, the divorce, although it had knocked me out, I was back up again, and I was going to forge ahead in a totally different way than anybody expected of me. And I was going to do it unapologetically on my own terms. So I had these dueling desires. One was to totally protect and shield my kids and be like the mama bear I'd always been. And the other was to rise up and be the phoenix that I wanted to be.
Right.
And I tried to do both. I still try to do both. Both are very important to me. And so I decided to write the book, and to write really openly about sex and dating in midlife after a long marriage, because I didn't want to feel shame about it. I felt that I had a right to live the life that I wanted to live, given the circumstances that had been thrown my way. It wasn't my choice, really, to not be part of my marriage anymore. But I also didn't want to be the victim. I didn't want to suffer with anger or sadness. I wanted to move on. And so that is basically how the book came into being. Was just, I kind of closed my eyes and just went for it.
And that is so encouraging and inspiring, because I think often a lot of us live in silence post-divorce and are afraid to share part of this journey. So I was curious to know, how has the response been since the book has launched? What are women saying? I know I personally have listened to it on audio and can't speak highly enough about it, and it just could relate on so many levels, but curious to know the response, and then your response from your children, because I think that is important to note as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you for listening to it. Yeah. I think mostly from the world, people, strangers and friends, the reaction has been positive in the sense of, okay, you know what? You're showing us that we can have an act two. And several women have said to me, you have encouraged me to go and find my sexual mojo. You've given me permission. I see it's okay now that you can be a really dedicated mother, that you can be an upstanding citizen, and you can also love to have sex and have a really satisfying sex life. And that all of these things are not mutually exclusive. So that, and of course, there's the opposite too. There's definitely been the reaction to people, who are really negative about it and feel like, how could you? How could you expose why do you talk about things that are so private? These things are meant to be private. And how could you expose yourself like this, especially as a mother? What kind of mother does that? So there's been both. And depending on the day is what I focus on. Some days I feel totally, like, wow, I did this and I feel so great. And I'm leading the way in a sexual, freedom for divorcees. And then other days I think, what was I thinking? Why does anybody care? Why should anybody care what I did? What I have to say? Why did I feel so free to do this? So, it just depends on the day. Most days I feel good about it. It's hard to feel good.
I want to pause there, because I think everybody in this space, the divorce space, feels that way sometimes. It's like, does anybody care about my personal story? And at the end of the day, I think it's a sense of community that we are bringing to this space that wasn't there before.
Yeah.
Because so many of us were afraid to share our stories, share our pain and what we've been through. And it's uniting everybody, I think, at this point. So I applaud you for doing this.
I think that's true, because I think there's so much embarrassment in it, to be left by your husband, to not be desired anymore by the person that you gave decades of your life to, or less. It doesn't even matter timing wise. It's really hard to talk about these things. With my children, I want to say that, and this is really important for me to note, because it was very tumultuous. My kids were all, when I wrote the book, my kids are 21, 18, and 11 now. So, minus a couple of years when I wrote the book. And it was weird for them all in different ways. And for my eldest daughter, to whom I'm very close, it was really mortifying. She did not want me to write it. She was embarrassed. She was humiliated. She felt like this is not something that not in keeping with the mother I had always been. And she really struggled with it. And I said, okay, but for me to not do it for you would be me putting myself back in the box that I was in all these years, where I do for everybody and I never do for myself. And I can't do it. I can't do it for any of you. In all fairness, you don't have to read the book.
Right.
You don't have to follow my Instagram about the book. But I don't think you want to be the reason I don't do the book. That's a lot to live with. And she struggled. The other kids didn't mind as much. They're just different personalities. They were a little bit embarrassed, but as time went on, they got less so. And I'd say my son, who's the middle, was really like, "You do you, mom. Go live
I
your
love it.
life." And my little one, she's so funny. She's 11 now. She started middle school this year. She came out on the first day of school. She was still 10 at the time. And she said, "Mom, I told my English teacher that you published a book and she wants you to come in and talk about it with my class."
Oh, I
And
love
I said, "Well, what did you tell her?" And she said, "I told her it's not for children."
it.
So
Oh,
I had great support, and she's really proud of me. And I feel so proud that I'm able to be a role model to this child to say, you're going on this path, and your life takes a sudden turn, and then you go on a new path, but you just keep going. And my
mhm.
eldest daughter, who struggled, she's really wrapped her head around it. And I think it's like anything, you do it, you own it. I did apologize. I felt badly that I was embarrassing her. I wasn't embarrassed. I wasn't apologetic that I had a lot of sex. I wasn't
Mhm.
apologetic that I went on a lot of dates. I wasn't apologetic that I wrote about it. I only was apologetic that it was embarrassing to her. And
Mhm.
so she's come to terms with it. And I think that she feels now like she's proud. She'll never read it, and she shouldn't. No, nobody really needs to read this about their mother. But
Yeah.
regardless, she's done more than accepted it. I think she's accepted it quite gracefully.
Yeah. So now looking at the last 4 years of your life and going through this journey, what are some takeaways that you have from it? And why do you think that women need to explore it and do the same?
I think it's very important in all of this. I mean, you have a chance when you get divorced to do something different
Yep.
and to keep the parts of yourself that you love and respect the most,
Mhm.
and to change the parts of yourself that you realize aren't working. I think it's incredibly important to be self-aware and to own whatever your mistakes may have been, your blind spots, especially. I think I had a lot of blind spots. I needed my marriage to work for a lot of reasons that came from having a difficult childhood and a fractured family. And I overlooked a lot. And I
Mhm.
definitely overlooked my own needs most of the time. So I think it's very empowering for women to find their voices, find their sexual appetites, find out what makes sense for them in the world going forward. And then the beauty is that we all get to decide what we want to do going forward. Some of us might want to get remarried. Some of us might want to be single forever. Some of us might want to be in non-monogamous relationships. We get to decide those things going forward. It's like being, like you've been cut off a leash in some ways.
Right.
And
Yeah.
for all of the sadness and the grief that comes with ending a marriage, so does liberation,
Mhm.
which I think a lot of women talk about. And there's no, I'm not, I don't feel shame about anything that I did. I do constantly feel surprised at looking back at how complacent I was in my married life and how happy I thought I was,
Right.
and how much redefining there's been for me. And
Mhm.
so I think having sex, like being open to these sexual experiences, it really just gave me myself back. It gave me my confidence back, my independence, and my desire to take care of myself, and to
Yeah.
see that
So it
that
wasn't
was,
necessarily the act of sex, although I'm sure that had its
yeah,
pluses, right? But it was,
yeah.
to your point, finding more about who you are, what you need, what you desire, and what you want your life to be like.
And how to recognize yourself in it. I think that
Mhm.
the one thing I really felt in hindsight, I mean, I did kind of sow my wild oats after I got separated, and I've heard from a lot of women who have done something similar. And then after about a year, I got tired. It was like I was so physically active that I was like, oh my God, now I just want to go home and go to bed. Like
Right?
that, a successful night to me would be like climbing between my, covers and getting to just like take up the whole bed and go to sleep.
Mhm.
But it was a process of discovery. And I think the biggest discovery for me was how much I had allowed myself to be neglected. And so sex became for me a symbol of something that you do for yourself, right? You're not doing it for your children. I was no longer doing it to procreate as I
Right.
had earlier in my life. I wasn't doing it as as a connection point with my husband or as a favor to him, as it became in many ways. It was purely about myself. And so it became this vehicle that I used to get to know myself and just honor myself.
Yeah.
And I don't think that anything suffered. I don't think I think that my relationship with my ex-husband flourished in many ways because I was taking care of myself and I was grateful to be in a position to do so. I don't think my mothering, was at all impacted because for me, it's always been very separate. Like my dating life is very separate from my children. And maybe someday I'll be interested in integrating it. I'm not right now. So that's still very separate for me. It's like my life when I'm not with them. But I think if you just give yourself a chance to get to know yourself without judgment.
Yeah, absolutely. And then curious to know, where are you in your whole journey right now? What does your normal life look like? And are you done with what I refer to as the phase after post-divorce?
Sadly, I think I am. Although I have such a stellar lingerie collection that I've amassed that I feel like I should, if
I
for no
love it.
other reason than to put my beautiful lingerie to good use now.
Yeah.
I've been dating somebody for about 3 years,
Mhm.
and he's number 6 in the book. And he was there. I was still dating other people, and I actually still leave the relationship pretty open,
Mhm.
in the sense of I don't know where we're going. I'm here right now. I
Yeah.
really enjoy his company. He is very good to me. He treats me really well. I try to do the same for him. We have a really good time together. We enjoy our time together. His kids are older, they're grown. So his free time is really his own. And I'm the one
Mm.
who's more divided between, my kids, especially my daughter, since she's only 11. But I'm not sure. I'm for somebody who spent her life just wanting to get married and have kids. I have surprised myself by feeling now that I don't want to be married again and that I
Mhm.
don't want to cohabitate with someone again. I really like having my own space and having the freedom to explore still whatever I want. And that means to me still, if I wanted to have a one night stand with somebody because I wanted to, that I could,
Yeah.
and that I have the freedom to do that. And the man I'm dating, he understands that's where I am, and we're very honest and open, and we communicate really well with each other. So he understands that that's always a possibility. I'll never lie. Um, I never want to set myself up for failure of
Mhm.
putting myself into a relationship that is more constrained than what I want. Maybe someday I want it. It's just not, right now, 4 years out, my divorce is almost final.
Yeah.
After, a year, it's hard, right? Like the
Yep.
negotiations to get to the end is really hard and long and stressful. So I'm still really embracing being on my own. Uh,
And I love that fact that you don't feel like you have to check up another box, right? And I think
yeah.
that so many of us have felt like we've had to check boxes throughout our life, and
Yeah.
now you're given a second chance to live basically how you want, and you don't need to create this box where you have to fit in.
No.
Um,
And
yeah.
that's kind of amazing. I think even one thing that my partner said is he said, I think in the beginning when I explained to him that I really was not interested in being in a purely monogamous relationship, even though I'm not interested in dating other people because there's just not enough hours in the day and I am pretty dedicated to
Right.
him, um, that it was really against the norm in his mind. It was against the norm. And so that was uncomfortable. And then
Mhm.
I think he grew to understand, you know what? Who says we have to be going according to what the norm is? Like it didn't work that well
Exactly.
for either of us. We were both in marriages that lasted over 20 years. It didn't work that great.
Let's try
And
something different.
let's try something different. And we
Yeah.
respect each other. And the funny thing is that it's been COVID. So what am I doing? Like, I'm not really doing anything, but it's just psychologically, I know that the door is always open
Yeah.
and that I'm still honoring myself and where I am in my journey. Which is, I think, what it is so important for women to do is just to have the respect for themselves
Yeah.
and the openness to just explore who they want to be.
Gosh, well, I appreciate you, one, sharing your vulnerability with us and just all the tangible advice that you've shared with our community. Is there anything in closing that you wanted to add?
I think just really, I hope that women, who listen to this, who are maybe in early days, know that there is a strong community of women that they remember that being divorced is not a reflection of anything, of any kind of failure on their part, and to release themselves of the feeling that they failed in some ways, they can forge ahead with a lot of confidence and courage.
Such beautifully stated. And gosh, I appreciate you and your time and just again sharing your personal story with the community because so many of us can relate to the journey that you've been on. And we are proud that you have taken the courage to actually share your story and can relate to so many. So I appreciate you.
Thank you, Kim. I appreciate you too.
All right, take care.